You're listening to WSUW 91.7 FM, The Edge in Whitewater, Wisconsin. This is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin. I'm excited to welcome back to the program one of the most popular bloggers in Russia with his 110,000 followers. Slava Rabinovich, welcome back.
Thank you, Yuri.
It's honor to have you. It's you're a busy guy. Slava, tell us, the first thing I'd like to discuss is that we have Mr. Trump, who, may not become president of the United States, but certainly has shown a very interesting connection and affinity for Mr. Putin. And so I wanted to begin by getting your take on what do you think is the nature of that relationship, or anything that you want to share, kind of your perspective from inside the Mordor.
Well, Mr. Trump represents, obviously, a camp in the U.S. Which is not even supported by a great number of Republicans themselves. And this camp, in the eyes of and in the view of the Kremlin, is designed and destined to inflict some instability onto the United States. And any kind of instability in any political and economic and state system of any kind of a country which the Kremlin views as an adversary would be a good thing, and hence it is obvious that in this logic, Putin would pick Trump as a destabilizing factor in his overall geopolitical game, if one can call his international crimes as such.
All right.
On the other hand, he understands that Hillary Clinton is not going to give him an easy life if and when she's in the office. And based on the lame duck status of the outgoing president, who, in addition to being an outgoing president, also would like to continue sitting in the office without any major world shock waves in terms of his quote-unquote peaceful initiatives, meaning doing nothing in the world and not being able to confront any kind of long-term threats such as Russia under the Putin's regime. In this context, Hillary Clinton is much more dangerous than Barack Obama, who is just counting days and does nothing, effectively nothing, about Putin's regime and his crimes in Ukraine and Syria, and before that in Georgia and so on.
So your view on President Obama's position is that of general appeasement?
That's correct, but you don't have to be a political analyst or, as you put it, a popular blogger or anybody else to see the obvious, right? There is another school of thought, which is a very, very far-fetched conspiracy theory, is that Putin and Clinton, Hillary Clinton, already had some serious behind-the-scenes negotiations where the Kremlin, being a KGB-driven, pragmatic, collective analysts of the situation, The Kremlin understands that most likely Hillary Clinton is going to be elected, but they need to somehow help her in that, and so they doing it with kind of a kind of demonstrative manifestation of their intentions in terms of helping Trump with the knowledge that it's going to hurt him.
Wow. So you're suggesting, or at least there could be a theory out there that suggests that all of this is actually being set up by Putin to help Hillary Clinton win the election, and this kind of what is for some reason Russian expression of bear's help, medvежья услуга, is something that is occurring here. Interesting. I don't know that.
I'm not subscribing to this point of view.
Okay.
I'm just telling you what I've heard among those who like discussing
these kinds of things.
Theories. But I must say that there is something behind it in terms of the logic. But I think that people tend to put much more intellect behind the Kremlin criminal gang. I don't think that they had any kind of a serious intention of that magnitude and deepness and understanding how it works.
Okay, so we'll just say that they're not really capable of such a conspiracy.
Yeah, I don't think they are capable of that. No.
All right. So what do you think is the nature of the relationship between Trump and Putin? Is this just merely that he is the extremist that Kremlin likes to, the exactly kind of extremist that Kremlin likes to support? Or is there some specific relationship between Trump and Putin that is unique? That do you feel that you have any insight from? We're speaking to you and you're in Russia. So what are people around you are saying? What is your opinion on the real nature of relationship between Putin and Trump?
I don't think that there is any relationship. I remember that Trump came over to Russia more than once, and he wanted to build some kind of a Russian equivalent of Trump Tower or something like that. And it was more than once, as I said, and one instance, it was in 2007, if I remember correctly, in the heydays of the Russian GDP growth of almost 10%, and this oil boom, and the stock market was booming in 2007, was gradually reaching 2,500 level on the RTS index. It is less than 1,000 right now, by the way. So these were the days when Trump wanted something from Russia. He didn't succeed, but at the same time, everybody wanted to come to Russia and do business here. There were, various Trumps of the world multiplied by thousands who were coming over. These were different times.
But what about the situation where the money, rather than Trump trying to bring his brand to Russia, instead Trump using Russian money to finance his ventures in America or wherever? Because, just my logic would say, well, oligarchs have money. They need to put money somewhere. Trump says, invest in me. Is that an idea that makes sense to you or does not?
Doesn't.
Okay.
The Russian oligarchs invest with Trump regardless of his status as a presidential candidate or not.
Okay.
We know, and we publicly know instances when very wealthy Russian people were buying either the properties built by Trump or, in fact, his own former mansion, if I remember correctly. It means nothing because we're talking about tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, while the Kremlin with its own off-the-budget secret financial resources, has billions or even tens of billions, and they would use it if they wanted to use this kind of money. I don't think that the Kremlin deployed any type of serious financial capital to help finance Trump in terms of Trump being a politician. But your question is kind of dividing his status. One status is Trump, a businessman. One is Trump, the politician. And in this respect, I don't think that Kremlin deployed any kind of serious resources directly in order to help Trump in exchange for some serious financial payback. If it was done in some shape or form, it was done with the goal, as I outlined in the beginning of my answer to this question. It is done solely to destabilize America in the context as the Kremlin understands how this destabilization can take place.
So then,
it is more. It is related more to the Kremlin's fantasy and inability to understand how the world in general and the United States in particular work. Because we all know if Trump seriously goes on the path of destabilizing the American system, there are checks and balances in the U.S. Political system up to the impeachment process. And the Kremlin doesn't have this mechanism of impeachment, which is workable in practice. It exists on paper, but it doesn't exist in reality in terms of the Russian politics. So the Kremlin, which never faced these kind of mechanisms and processes, the residents of the Kremlin just do not understand how America works. And so their plan is destined to fail. And moreover, as I said before, it is, as you said, medvежья услуга. It is something that hurts Trump rather than helps.
But then how do we explain in the end Trump's propensity to say nice things about Putin and refusing to say anything bad about him, even to the point of saying that Putin is laughing at Hillary Clinton and he outsmarted her at every level. And then he says, and then Trump says nice things about Assad. Is this, because there's two directions. Either Trump is attributing this, or either this is because there's some kind of a quid pro quo, or he just has this affinity for dictators. And I'm kind of curious what you think. Do you think that this is just his personality, that he likes these kinds of people, or is there more pragmatic reason?
Well, he has only two choices in terms of, for example, television debates with Hillary, right? He has the choice to agree with her or disagree with her. And in this context, he would either subscribe and to being in her camp on one or two or in 3 or 10 issues in, for example, foreign policy.
But this is a really big disagreement that really usually Democrats and Republicans agree on, and then they move to other issues.
Right, and that's why I was about to say the second point is that maybe you and many other people at large tend to attribute to Trump some kind of extraordinary intellectual abilities, allowing him to actually become the candidate for the presidency. But in my opinion, it is the other way around. I don't know really how this freak show happened with him being Republican candidate, but it is very possible that he just doesn't get it, and he understands nothing in foreign policy, and even less in about Russia. And so he's just talking. I don't want to use a bad word of American slang on your radio waves, but he's just talking BS.
Right. Well, it's actually, I had a guest in the past from Russia just recently who used that word, and I had to cut it out. Anyway, so I think that puts it to rest, and this is just who Mr. Trump is. So chances are pretty darn good that it's going to be President Hillary Clinton, though. And you kind of briefly touched on that, but just your thoughts on what Putin's relationship with Clinton could be, and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, we remember that it was the administration of nowhere near the administration of Trump in the past that tried to launch a process which was called
reset.
Was it called?
I think it was called reset.
Right, reset. In English, it was called reset. And Hillary Clinton was one of the responsible persons in this process. I don't know whether she regrets about that these days, but I must remind your listeners and you that the so-called reset was done after the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, which was sponsored by the Kremlin, and this kind of political murders cannot happen without signing off by the head of state, in this case, Putin.
Right, and just quickly, I'll remind to our listeners that Mr. Litvinenko was a former security agent who was murdered with a radioactive tea in London, and there were some pretty horrific pictures of him in his last days dying of radioaction or poisoning in the hospital. Continue, Slava, please.
Thanks for reminding and clarifying to your listeners. I will also add that a special prosecutor's office in the UK several months ago published a report where the crime was actually solved, not only in terms of details how Litvinenko was poisoned, but that this radioactive element, polonium-210, came from Russia. It was carried into the United Kingdom by two FSB officers who are hiding behind in the Russian parliament with the parliamentary immunity these days. They both were awarded highest state honors and awards, and the investigators in the UK attribute this murder to Russian FSB, which is a security service. And I should also say that it was a terrorist act, which was done in the center of London, where the UK citizen, Litvinenko, was murdered with radioactive materials which were smuggled from Russia into the UK. So this is a real serious stuff. And at approximately plus or minus at the same time, the same year, one of the most prolific Russian opposition journalists, Anna Politkovskaya, was murdered.
And yet, Mrs. Clinton initiated a reset with Russia and with Putin.
Right, and if you remind me of the chronology, I'm trying to.
I believe Politkovskaya was murdered in 2006 because this is the 10th anniversary, and Obama became president in 2008, so it's a couple of years later.
Right, but the invasion of Georgia happened
also 2008 in the summer,
and the reset was in 2008, right?
Either that or right around there, because that's at least we know that Obama is in charge.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that three events happened: the murder of Anna Politkovskaya, the journalist, the murder of Litvinenko in London, and the Russian invasion of Georgia, and effective annexation of two regions of Georgia. And after that, the U.S. reset with Russia was orchestrated, regardless of these horrific events and showcase behavior by Putin. So
absolutely. In fact, I just looked it up on March 6, 2009 in Geneva. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton presented Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov with a red button with the English word reset and the Roman alphabet перезагрузка.
Yes, and so
so she did it in spite of all those horrific events, is what you're saying?
Yeah. So I'm correct in chronology then.
Yes.
So three events of this magnitude happened, and so she has this kind of stuff on her record with Putin, and this is very, very.
Well, that would almost contradict, I suppose, those who are suspecting her of being rather a hawk. When it comes to issues of military and defense. But
on one hand, yes, but on the other hand, the last word in the foreign policy in the foreign policy issues are formulated by the president, right? So she was not the president. Now she will have her hands untied, and we also must say that after these three events, there were many, many more events of a much larger magnitude, which happened since then with Ukraine and Syria.
Sure, but as you pointed out, the main responsibility lies with the commander-in-chief, president, in this case, President Obama. So how President Clinton is going to handle this could be entirely different.
That's correct. That's what I'm saying. She's got this stain on her record for doing the reset in 2009. She may get rid of this stain, especially taking into account that Putin is basically went so far that nobody in the world would imagine that he would be going.
But Putin seems kind of fearless these days. What do you think, in your opinion, from your perspective, that President Clinton could do or should do to change the situation, and what is the outcome that she should even want?
Well, on the 22nd of June, 1941, and many weeks onwards, Adolf Hitler was also fearless. And we know many other instances in world history when various fearless, quote-unquote, leaders, quote-unquote, were doing what they were doing, only to blow up their own leadership along with their own countries and peoples. So Putin can really play a fearless guy, but at the end of the day, he's just a street bandit from the Soviet Leningrad days who is the international terrorist, who is the war criminal, who is a state criminal who is the murderer hiding behind the mask or the head of state. And if somebody would give me a counter argument that I cannot call him all these names because there was no court decision, and he has never been tried in The Hague, for example, and he was not
found guilty.
Found guilty, and he is not called criminal. It's the same faulty logic as saying that Holocaust, for example, all kinds of acts related to Holocaust were completely legal in Germany, for example, until May 1945, and this fact doesn't make Hitler and his gang not criminals. The fact that the genocide of the Jews and others was legal under this regime. And in fact, by this logic, we also can say that by April of 1945, Hitler and his gang were not criminals only because Nuremberg hasn't happened yet.
All right, Slava, you are making references to World War II, and you're comparing, it sounds to me, the situation, what we have now, to kind of a replay. But we do not have quite the military aspect that World War II carried, at least not yet. How do you see the situation develop from here?
You see, you're asking a question with an intention to get an answer of
yes, that is true.
At least some kind of a view. But the problem is that the world is facing a unique situation, and I don't think that too many people in the world understand this situation is unique. Internally, Putin did several things that lead Russia in an absolutely unknown direction in terms of what's going to happen next. First of all, he elected not to have any kind of a dialogue with an opposition. A dialogue with an opposition can only happen in two ways. One way, that's a dialogue in the parliament. A parliament is effectively destroyed. The opposition is not only in the parliament since 2003, but there is no parliament as a legal institution.
No, those people have been essentially, it seems, appointed to their positions. And from what I understand, the most recent news says that they have now pretty strict requirements about they have to vote in person. And so, they're like becoming just bureaucrats.
Exactly.
It's interesting. But how does...
The second way for a dialogue with an opposition could be a much more violent one, is the street. And this is also not possible, at least at this time, because the street opposition and demonstrations were completely eradicated after 2011 and 2012 wave of opposition activity in the streets by producing unconstitutional illegal laws which effectively forbid any type of demonstrations in the streets, and they were selective but quite, if not massive, then kind of mass selective showcase trials of opposition representatives for their participation in 2011-2012 demonstrations, who are now behind bars for 2, 3, 4, 5, even more years. And this scared people off. Nobody wants to go into the streets anymore. Then, according to the Russian constitution, so in the absence of a dialogue with an opposition, with any type of opposition, the Kremlin is on its own with any type of a feedback or anything like that. Then Putin also destroyed the constitutional not only division of powers but also the whole system of independent state
Court.
power in Russia. The court system is destroyed. The parliament is destroyed, both upper and lower chamber of the parliament. And in fact, the executive power of the president is destroyed because the president, as the constitution has it, must be elected for 4 years, and 2 terms of 4 years is the constitutional maximum. Instead of this, back in September of 2011, at the time, the then President Medvedev, who appeared to be not a president or even a successor to Putin, but rather a clown who was just sitting on his chair, warming this up for the next term. So he passed unconstitutional amendments that the 4-year term is now extended to 6 years. And Putin himself, with the pocket constitutional court, ruled that he can come back for a 3rd term if this 3rd term is not consecutive to the previous 2, which is complete mockery of the constitution and of the whole principle of the 2-term maximum as it appears in the constitution. So even Putin himself in this presidential seat is complete fake. It's unconstitutional for him to be called the president. And moreover, all of other mechanisms and checks and balances which come hand in hand with the presidential power, they all destroyed, such as I said before, the possibility of the impeachment with the process being initiated in the parliament, and so on and so forth. So he is not a president; he's a dictator, and not only a dictator, but he also already took Russia into the direction of a fascist dictatorship. His rhetoric, which started back in March of 2014, straight after the annexation of Crimea, and with the breaking so many bilateral and multilateral international agreements with Ukraine, and in fact with the United States as well, with the United States being the party and the signatory to the so-called Budapest Memorandum, which guaranteed territorial sovereignty to Ukraine, and under which the U.S., the U.K., and Ukraine itself and Russia put their signatures. All of this was violated, and at the same time, Putin started rhetoric of Adolf Hitler type of rhetoric, really, when Hitler was annexing the Sudet region of Czechoslovakia in 1938, and the same rhetoric of invading Poland in 1939. Putin was talking about the help and defending Russian-speaking population in other countries other than Russia, defending Russian population in East Ukraine, and he started talking about the so-called Novorossiya, which encompassed in his sick mind the majority of the regions of the entire eastern Ukraine. And this is not a joke. I mean, I hope that many people in the U.S. now realize that the regime in Russia has already turned from a authoritarian into dictatorship, and not only into dictatorship, but into a fascist dictatorship, at least since March 2014 and onwards. And this has been only worsening by the day by now. So when you're asking me what is going to happen in Russia, the answer to this question is very simple. Nobody knows anymore, because Putin destroyed so many checks and balances in the entire constitutional system that nobody can predict how it's going to play out. Putin destroyed the institution of free, fair, and honest elections. He destroyed the institution of power change and of basically the possibility of another president coming into the president's office after being elected by a popular vote. And in fact, Putin is not really fighting for power and or money anymore. He is fighting for his own life, because he committed so many grave crimes inside Russia and outside Russia that he knows very, very well that the only way to save his freedom and possibly life is to actually stay in the office forever until he dies by natural course. And so I think that he is destined to remain in the Kremlin until he's dead. The only possibility that he is going to be somehow kicked out of the Kremlin sooner rather than later is by some kind of a palace coup, if and when somebody from the so-called Russian elite just kills him in some kind of a really palace coup. And the entire situation is even more grave than many people think, just because in this situation this madman has nuclear button. So we are talking about a whole mafia which not infiltrated the powers that be, but the mafia came to power in Russia. And this mafia is the most dangerous mafia in the history of the mankind, because this is KGB mafia. It all comprised by former officers of the KGB of the USSR. And to make things even worse, this KGB mafia got possession of 47% of the entire world nuclear weapons.
Slava, I think you covered a lot of territory, so I will quickly remind listeners that this is Rashkin Report, and I'm your host, Yuri Rashkin, and my guest is Slava Rabinovich, one of the most popular bloggers in Russia, who's joining us by Skype from Russia. And we're discussing the American-Russian relations and all the challenges that Russia faces in an attempt to become anything but another Iraq, another Syria, another North Korea, where everything is being held together by authoritarian power. However, Slava, we have a big difference here, and that is that exactly as you mentioned, there's nuclear weapons, and also that the regime currently, running Russia is much more aggressive than Saddam Hussein's Iraq or any other, I can think of. Maybe, I don't know, what about Venezuela? But the internet attacks angle of the Russian-American relations is really rapidly becoming a big deal. So I think don't you think that will affect what United States is likely to do? But at the same time, the situation you described, it sounds like there will not be an explosion from underneath in Russia. So the only way that the situation is going to change is from an external involvement. Is that what we're waiting for?
Well, it's difficult to imagine how external involvement can play out against the mafia state and against the mafia itself, armed with nuclear weapons. In terms of Russian-sponsored hackers attacks and attempts to get involved in presidential elections and interfere in the U.S. presidential elections, obviously we know a lot about it, and different aspects of that have been discussed in the media. But at the same time, I would rather add that the internet era itself is something that is going to help to destroy this Putin's regime at some point. These KGB people, they all went to the so-called higher KGB school of the USSR in early and mid and late 1970s. They don't know in full what the internet is about. Putin once said that the internet was invented in the U.S. by the CIA. They are afraid of the internet. They certainly underestimate the power of the internet. They are watching in horror in many cases when some information is spread around the globe in a matter of seconds, exposing their lies. Only yesterday or the day before yesterday, the defense ministry in Russia, in a very usual form of playing bad hand in cards, they turned the tables and they accused Belgium and the Belgium F-16 planes of bombing the Aleppo in some kind of a surrealistic kind of
statement.
And very, very shortly, Belgium exposed the Kremlin lies and issued counter statements, and in fact summoned the Russian ambassador to the foreign ministry in Belgium with protests. But this is just the most recent example, but we obviously see this kind of internet exposing their lies many, not even months, but years by now, starting with the most hot and most aggressive campaign, which started in March of 2014. I think that this is something that they really underestimate, and this is going to hurt them a lot. But at the same time, I have a very good medication, drug to administer to the Kremlin regime if I were the U.S. president. And if I were a U.S. president with lots of political weight to put the entire European Union, Japan, Australia, Canada, behind me to do what I'm going to say. The West, with the U.S. as a leader, should have already 2 years ago issued so-called personal sanctions, not against a bunch of Putin's closest friends in the number of 20 or 30 people or something like that, or even less. But I would be putting personal sanctions against 200 people in the very beginning and adding 100 people to the list every month. So that in 1 year, the list would have been 1,400 names long, 200 at first, and then 100 each month. And with the 1,400 people on the personal sanctions list, Putin would have been out of the Kremlin by internal coup a year ago.
So in the end, it comes down to stronger sanctions.
These sanctions should not hurt.
And this is what will avoid involvement by force, and this is what will allow and motivate the palace coup to occur, as it sounds like that's the most peaceful way of transferring power in the current Russian environment. So just stronger sanctions.
Yes, but again, sanctions could be different. I would not institute sanctions that would hurt the Russian economy more than they already hurting, and I would try to avoid hurting the Russian people, because this could be a backlash, a popular backlash at the West, where sanctions really hurt the population at large. I would be targeting sanctions against specific people, and at some point there will be critical mass of those people who are specifically targeted and hurt from the so-called quote-unquote Russian elite, that the Russian elite would collectively decide that Putin is no longer fit to represent their interests within Russia or outside of Russia. And obviously, this so-called collective elite would have been consulting with the West behind the scenes in terms of the succession, and I'm sure that in this case the West would have extended only two serious conditions on the candidacy of a successor. Two groups of people would be not acceptable to the West, and the Russian elite should have been made aware of that. The first group would be those who can, after the change of the regime, who can be tried at the court in The Hague and be accused of war crimes. So the West would have said no war criminals, any kind of war criminals or criminal as a successor. And the second serious condition would have probably been no more KGB officers, no more those who ever served in the KGB. And I'm sure that among the so-called Russian elite, there are many suitable candidates who are not falling in either or both of these groups.
Any chance that they will come from any of the opposition groups?
It's unlikely. Only if from the groups of the so-called systemic liberals, from those opposition liberals that kind of cooperate with the president.
That can claim to have a political party.
No, I'm sure that somebody. You see, this palace coup would not be a permanent transition anyway. Both the West and Russia. I mean, Russian elite would understand that it's going to be a transition period until some kind of a much more substantial change in Russian politics. But as a transition figure, the West would have been more receptive to the idea that Putin must go, and that somebody who would be acceptable to everybody, at least as a transitional figure. The West would say, okay, we will need to speak to somebody anyway. So if we need to speak to somebody in Russia anyway, who that might be? It cannot be a war criminal, and it cannot be a KGB officer. Can Dmitry Medvedev be such a person, the current prime minister and the former president, even if he has a reputation of just somebody who was keeping the chair for Putin? Yes, he can be such a transitional figure. Can that figure be Igor Shuvalov, the first deputy prime minister who is known the world over to be a corrupt, very, very wealthy guy who spent last 15 years trading on inside information and not being put away in jail for that, and in fact being the first deputy prime minister. Yes, he can be such a transitional figure. And I think the most likely candidate who would have satisfied the West criteria in the West would have been Alexei Kudrin, a former Minister of Finance and first deputy prime minister, and who is in the camp of the so-called systemic liberals. And there are many other people of this sort who are not war criminals and who are not KGB officers. But this type of a figure would be only a transition figure until some kind of a next round of the Russian Revolution, hopefully not a very bloody one, or not bloody, period. But it has to happen somehow. Some trigger must be present to actually be a catalyst to this process. And I believe that in order for this to happen, the West must really go after a great number of people with personal sanctions in a very, very painful but sure process for the number of people to reach a critical mass where they would just somehow get Putin out of his office.
All right. Slava Rabinovich, thank you so much for being on the program once again, and we'll have to keep watching what happens.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you. You're listening to 91.7 FM, WSUW, in Whitewater, Wisconsin. You're listening to Rashkin Report.